Are you leading or helping lead the launch of a corporate social responsibility program at your company? This video is for you. I have talked a bit about my experience starting and leading a nonprofit organization, but one thing I haven't gotten into very much yet is how that work involved working with dozens of companies who wanted to make a social impact. There really are so many companies who genuinely want to make an impact in their communities. And with solid partnerships between these businesses and the nonprofits serving those communities, there's an opportunity to make some real social impact and really move the needle on these issues. Throughout my work, I've seen so many different varieties of corporate social responsibility programs, some that made a huge impact and some that were maybe a little bit more style than substance. So in this video, I wanted to do something a little bit different than my normal videos, and that is to talk about corporate social responsibility. I'm going to go through 10 questions that folks who are perhaps working in the space of developing, leading, launching corporate social responsibility programs, 10 questions to think about how you might be able to partner effectively with nonprofits in your community to make those programs deeply impactful. And this is all going to be from the perspective of a nonprofit professional. So someone who has seen these programs in action and been on the other side of receiving the benefits from them. All right, let's do this. Before we begin, just a reminder, I'm Amber Melanie Smith. I'm a nonprofit founder, former nonprofit executive director, and as I just stated previously, someone who's partnered with many businesses to do good in the community as well. I make these videos here on YouTube all about social impact. So there are so many ways to create positive change in our communities, and I hope to cover all of them someday through this channel. If you're looking for actionable strategies and tips on how to create your own social impact, join my newsletter, Changemaker Mondays. I thought it would be interesting to do this video from the perspective of a nonprofit leader, nonprofit professional, because from that world, there are so many insights into what can make a social responsibility program really effective and impactful in the community. Nonprofits are on the ground, leading change every day, and companies and nonprofits, when having discussions together, can really get at the heart of how to use the skills and the assets of the company to the best benefit of the community. So all that said, let's get into some questions that corporate social responsibility or CSR professionals can think through when developing these social impact programs for deep impact. The first question for CSR professionals to think through is very simply, what are the biggest needs in our service area, in our community? What are the social and environmental issues that are especially prevalent here? And how can our business best address them? A first step here is, of course, to check out what some of the local nonprofits are already working on. What are their current priorities? What are their missions? What are the challenges that they're currently facing? If you haven't yet had a conversation with some of the leaders from these nonprofits, that would be an amazing first step, is to create a list of the organizations tackling the issue areas that are concerned to your company and invite them to have some coffee, invite them for a meeting and have a great dialogue about this. But if you haven't honed in on a specific issue area for your company's social responsibility program yet, then getting the landscape of the nonprofits doing the work can be helpful in determining that as well. There are going to be some issues in some communities that are more prevalent or a higher priority to its citizens than in other communities. You might have a city where affordable housing is a huge issue and environmental sustainability is a bigger issue in another community. So really listening and putting your ear to the ground to determine what's on the minds of the people who live in the area that your headquarters is established, or that your office is established, can be a great first step. The next question to think through is, how can we leverage our company's unique assets, unique skills, and resources to benefit nonprofits in the community and our nonprofit partners? Every company is different. And of course, you know what services you're already providing the world. And so how can you leverage some of the talents that are required to execute on those services to then turn around and help the community? Do your employees have specific competencies or superpowers that might be utilized to benefit others? In addition to financial contributions, are there special skills or maybe software or services that you could pair with that financial support to deepen your impact for partners too? A great example of this is website design companies offering some pro bono website design services. It's important to think about this because sometimes there's a default setting on corporate social responsibility programs where the assumption is that we just need to send our employees out to go build a house for Habitat for Humanity or do this or do that. But if you leverage the thing that makes you unique, the special skills that you have as a company and as a team, you might be able to make an even deeper impact because the nonprofits that you're serving and partnering with wouldn't be able to get those types of services and expertise elsewhere. You can also think about how to apply the skill sets and resources of your company to invest in the capacity of nonprofit partners. One-time hands-on projects are great and they certainly have their place, but what can you be doing as a company to help create some sustainability for the nonprofits you're partnering with and increase their capacity to even do more than they're already doing? The third question CSR professionals want to think about when developing, growing, or launching their social responsibility programs is how can we form long-term relationships with nonprofits versus the short-term or transactional types of support? What does a meaningful long-term collaboration look like from both sides? How can the relationship be deepened over time and tracking that impact over time that's made together? Are there some ways we can co-create a long-term strategy to make an impact? Nonprofits are used to having to be the thought leaders to develop strategies to end homelessness and food insecurity and all that in their communities. But other stakeholders, like businesses, can play a role in offering their insights and their feedback and being partners throughout that process as well. I'll never forget when I worked with the nonprofit that I started, we had a wonderful corporate partner who stuck with us for the long term. Not only did they provide financial support, but they were thought partners. They would schedule meetings just to check in, see what our current challenges were, and they really created a trusting environment where we, as the nonprofit leaders, felt like we could share anything that was on our minds, even really hard challenges. And they would help us think through those things. And it didn't mean that they inserted themselves into the work that we were doing in ways that didn't make sense. There was really thoughtful conversation around, does it make sense to help us with this? How can we be a support in this particular area? What does support look like for this situation? Do you just want to talk about it? Do you need financial contribution? Do you need someone to help you work through this problem with your team in a consulting session? So they were just, a nonprofit ride or die. And I love that there are these companies out there and there's people who are thinking in those terms, in terms of how to partner like that and create this really trusting relationship with a nonprofit. The fourth question you want to think about is how are we going to measure the impact of our CSR programs on the nonprofits that we're partnering with and the community at large? Now, obviously, corporate social responsibility programs might have their own metrics related to the internal operations of the company, things like how many people are attending different events or how are the programs impacting employee morale or employee retention and recruitment? And by the way, there's some pretty great research on how social impact programs attract talent and lead to greater rates of employee retention, but maybe that's a totally separate video. For this, we want to be thinking about the impact that the programs are having on the community. And I want us to think about these questions beyond the outputs, like number of volunteers who showed up. Nonprofits are constantly thinking about how do they measure both outputs, like how many volunteers showed up or how many people fed, and those outcomes How many people have left a cycle of food insecurity as a result of programs? So you might consider examples like, how have we built the capacity of the nonprofit partners that we've worked with over time? How do the leaders of our community partners, these nonprofits, feel about our support over time? What is the difference between before we partnered with these organizations and the long term after? And I think that would tell a really great story of the impact that you're making in a deep way. Piggybacking on this question of outcomes is question number 5 to consider when developing or launching a CSR program. And that is, how are we going to ensure that our CSR efforts are making truly beneficial impacts to the nonprofits and the communities that we serve? And part of that is collecting feedback. So, what are your mechanisms or systems that are in place that will allow you to regularly collect that feedback from the communities that you serve? I like to think of the example of Tom's shoes. If you're familiar with them, you might know that years ago, they used to have a 1-for-1 model that was part of their corporate social responsibility efforts, which meant that for every pair of shoes they sold, they would give a pair away to a child or someone in a country that needed it. But after receiving feedback that that way of giving wasn't as impactful as it could be, they changed their model to just make a financial contribution to communities instead. And now they're giving, I think, like a third of their profits away, or some large financial contribution amount. Don't take my exact word for the numbers, but look it up yourself. But they're making a large financial contribution instead of that 1-for-1 model that they had. So this was a way that Tom's Shoes and others who have followed in their footsteps, see what I did there, are using data and feedback from the communities that they serve in order to pivot their social good programs. The sixth question to think about is, how can we, of course, engage our employees in these social impact programs? And not just in a way that provides volunteer opportunities, that's important, but also educational and giving opportunities. As a company, you have such an amazing opportunity to reach hundreds potentially of people in the world through your employee base, to help them have access to learning about different social issues that they might not have had access to before. So I would say, in addition to providing ways to volunteer and to give financially if possible, providing flexible opportunities where they can learn more deeply about the issues that the company supports. Everyone wants to know the why behind their volunteering and their giving. They want to know the impact that it's making. They also want to understand why the problem exists and how the volunteering or the giving is going to contribute to changing that. Nonprofits do a lot of legwork to try to educate the public on these issues, but this is a great way that you can be a team member to organizations in that education process too.
Question 7 is all about, are there opportunities to engage the broader community in your social impact efforts as well? I think it's easy to think of a social responsibility program as just internal to your company and involving your employees or your leadership. But if you think like a nonprofit, then there's great opportunities to engage the community as well. And it might have the side effect of increasing brand awareness for your company too. And I get it. I know that there are some logistical hurdles here because you might have liability issues with how you engage with the public, or even legal issues depending on your situation. But I've seen some companies get really creative with this. I know of some larger companies and some smaller ones, for example, who, when they have a volunteer project, they make sure that the family members of those employees are also invited to participate. Sometimes businesses will stand alongside a nonprofit when educating the public at some kind of large community event. There's also cause marketing, where you're teaming up with organizations to develop a marketing campaign specifically about a social issue, or with the goal of raising money or recruiting volunteers or having some kind of outcome for a social impact project that will inevitably reach the broader community through the marketing messages put out. Question number 8 is all about how can we put some systems in place to be able to transparently communicate about the goals and the challenges and the outcomes of our CSR programs. We know that if we're hoping that our social responsibility programs are going to have a side effect of building public trust, that requires some amount of transparent communication. And I think it goes a long way when we see these companies who share about some of the ways they're succeeding in their social impact and some of the ways that they're falling short, but their plans to mitigate that shortfall, what they're going to do to do even better. Nonprofits do this all the time where they share some of the things that have been working really well, some of the areas where they need some help, and talking about their strategy and perhaps a strategic plan. I think it would be really interesting to see corporate social responsibility programs publicize a strategic plan specific to that program a little bit more widely. I think that it would really help build a public interest and impact in what they're trying to do as well. Question number 9 is really important, and that is how can we ensure that our CSR initiatives are culturally sensitive and inclusive, especially when you have larger companies that might be employing people from all sorts of places around the world or a very diverse demographic. It's really important to make sure that we are understanding that our understanding different issues might not be the same across all groups. One kind of unfortunate thing I've personally observed in the volunteer space, and this isn't specific to companies, though it could apply here, is when a volunteer signs up to help out with an issue that might be impacting a vulnerable community. And let's say it's delivering food or working with the unhoused population. And they go and they volunteer alongside these people. And there's this sort of sense that you are, the power dynamic is just off, right? So you're feeling like, oh, this poor person, I need to make sure that I give, I have so much, I have so little. And I think the dialogue around volunteer management in this particular area is shifting to help people change that perspective, right? So instead of thinking of someone as less than or less fortunate, we are starting to think of it more like we're walking alongside each other and solving this issue together. And the reason it's important and how it applies to corporate social responsibility is you never know when you're going to be in a situation that requires you to get help. It could happen on a dime. And so removing any judgment about why someone might be in a situation or the circumstances of their life, their education, their abilities, etc., their capacity, their intelligence, all of that. It's important because situations could be reversed at any time. And we can apply that to social responsibility programs. What that looks like is making sure if we have something like an employee volunteer initiative or a social impact campaign or something, there are opportunities that authentically allow employees to develop empathy for someone who might be in another situation from them, learning about what their lives might be like, opportunities to ask them questions and then listening respectfully to the answers. I know that this sounds hard, and it is, but if you can pull this off in your corporate social responsibility program, you're not just going to transform aspects of the community and deeply support the nonprofit partners that you're working with, but you're also going to transform the lives and perspective of your own employees. And that is a whole nother layer of changing the world. And that brings us to our 10th and final question to think through as CSR professionals, and that is, how can we use these social responsibility programs to contribute to broader systemic change and activities that are going to end the social problem at their root? How can we leverage our influence, our numbers, our voice as a company to advocate for broader systems change for policies that are going to be more fair to people? How can we use the resources of our company to, as they say, go upstream and find out why people are falling into the river? I've talked about this in other videos, but when you're talking about social impact, there's two sides of the coin. There's the day-to-day, that's the charity, right? That's the feeding people right now. People do need to be fed right now. But if we never address the other side of the coin, which is systemic change, to figure out why are people consistently hungry, why haven't we ended this problem yet, then we're always going to have the people who are hungry, and that suffering will be perpetuated. So when we think of this in nonprofits, we think about how can we contribute to both sides of this coin to make sure people are getting fed today, but that we're also doing the work to try to end hunger in the first place. And companies can be a major part of this conversation if we can have really great dialogue between the sectors, between the nonprofit and the private sectors. All right, I'd love to hear from you. Are you working through some of these questions as a corporate social responsibility leader or team member? Share what you're thinking in the comments below. And flipping the script, what would you ask nonprofits about how to engage with companies? So I'm curious. Maybe we can get some answers for you through our Changemaker community. Once again, if you're looking for tips on social impact and strategy around how to create positive social change, check out my newsletter, Changemaker Mondays. We are talking strategies on how to mobilize your community, how to measure your social impact, all sorts of good stuff. You don't want to miss it. The link to subscribe to that newsletter is below this video. Finally, check out my Facebook group, Change the World or Bust. We have thousands of people in there who are amazing change makers from around the world. We'd love to have you join that group, and I'll hopefully see you there. Once again, I'm Amber Melanie Smith, and I'll see you later. Bye.